There's a frequency the galaxy learned very slowly and at enormous cost never to broadcast. Not because the signal is dangerous, not because it carries a virus or a weapon or coordinates to something terrible. The signal itself is just mathematics. 17 compressed packets. A distress call. Standard interstellar emergency protocol, ratified by the Galactic Accord in the year 4412 by Terran reckoning. Any ship, any species, any emergency. Broadcast and wait for rescue. The Velhari broadcasted it. They did not know what they were waking up. None of them ever do. Here is what the records show, pulled from the black box of the GSV Unbroken Meridian, the first human vessel to receive the signal. The crew heard it at 3:14 ship time. They were eating. They were arguing about something trivial, a card game, a debt of 17 credits, something that would have mattered enormously the next morning if the morning had gone differently. Captain Yara Solis set down her fork. She did not finish her sentence. She did not finish her meal. She said 2 words to her crew, and the Unbroken Meridian changed course at full burn toward a system that every other species in the sector had quietly, carefully, deliberately avoided. The 2 words were, someone's hurt. What followed is now taught in 47 military academies across the Galactic Accord. Not as a lesson in strategy, not as a lesson in warfare, but as a warning, a reminder, a thing with a label on it that reads, this is what happens when you send a distress signal into the dark and a human answers it. This is that story. The card game had been going on for 6 hours, which is about 5 hours longer than it should have been, given that Ensign Rika Tanaka had been losing steadily since the second hand and showed absolutely no sign of stopping. He had 17 credits left. He had the expression of a man watching his own funeral through a window he could not open. Across the table, Chief Engineer Lena Vasquez was doing the thing she always did when she was winning. She was pretending she was not winning, which somehow made it worse. You could fold, she said, not looking at him. I could also float into deep space without a suit, Riku said. Both options have about the same appeal. Lieutenant Commander Osei Mensa was not playing. He was eating something that the ship's fabricator called a stew, but which tasted, in his private opinion, like regret dissolved in warm water. He ate anyway. Space food was space food, and complaining about it was a hobby for people who had not spent 3 years on long-haul survey routes where the alternative was nutrient paste from a tube. The stew was fine. The stew was great, actually. The stew had never betrayed him. Captain Yara Solis was at the head of the table eating rice and reading a repair manifest on her tablet, making small sounds of displeasure that everyone had learned to decode. A short sound meant minor annoyance. A longer sound meant budget problems. The sound she made now, a sustained exhale through her nose, meant that something on the manifest was both expensive and stupid, which was the most common category of ship problem across the known universe. The GSV Unbroken Meridian was a mid-class survey and transport vessel, built for durability rather than elegance, which was evident in the way every surface was either gray or slightly more gray. It had a crew of 11. It was currently 3 weeks out from the Cashin relay station, doing a standard route through the outer spur, mapping, sample collection, the occasional diplomatic mail drop. Nothing that required urgency. Nothing that required anything more than competence and patience, both of which the crew had in abundance, though Riku's competence at card games was increasingly in question. The signal came at 3:14. It did not announce itself dramatically. Nothing flashed. Nothing screamed. The communications panel in the corner of the mess simply emitted a soft tone, a sound the computer reserved for incoming priority transmissions, and then the screen populated with 17 data packets arranged in a very specific sequence that every spacefaring species in the Accord had agreed, for 100 years ago, meant one thing. Help! We are dying. Please. Yara set down her fork. Not slowly. Not dramatically. She set it down the way you set something down when your hands have already started doing something else, and the fork is simply no longer relevant to the situation. She was across the room before Riku had fully processed what the tone meant, her tablet already open to the navigation overlay, her eyes moving across the signal data with the speed of someone reading a language they had spoken their entire life. Where? She said. It was not a question. Vethra System, the ship's AI responded. Its name was Cord, short for nothing in particular. The previous captain had named it, and had not been creative. Bearing 27 Mark IV. Estimated distance, 14 hours at current speed. 9 hours at full burn. Full burn, Yara said. Osei put down his spoon. Yara, Someone's hurt. She said it simply, the way you state the temperature or the time. A fact that organized all other facts around it into a clear hierarchy. Someone was hurt. Therefore, everything else, the manifest, the card game, the stew, the 17 credits, the repair budget, all of it sorted itself automatically into the category of things that do not matter right now. The unbroken meridian changed course. 14 minutes later, when the initial excitement had settled into the focused hum of a crew preparing for an emergency response, Osei pulled up the Vethra system profile on the navigation console and stood very still for a moment, reading it twice, and then a third time, and then he went to find a captain. She was in the command chair, running through emergency response protocols. Yara, he said. Vethra. I know. The Velhari control that system. I know. The Velhari are not. They have not historically been. He stopped. Selected a more precise word. They are not friendly. Specifically to humans. There's an incident on record from 4419. The Harmon Station incident. They Osei. She looked at him. Someone broadcast a distress signal. A Velhari someone. A someone. She turned back to the console. Get everyone prepped. I want the med bay ready. I want the cargo bay reconfigured for emergency intake. I want Vasquez to have the docking clamps triple-checked, because if we're pulling survivors off a damaged ship, I don't want clamp failure to be the thing that kills us. Osei stood there for one more second. He was a careful man, a thoughtful man. He had made his career on the survey routes by being the kind of person who read the whole document before signing anything, who checked the secondary airlock even when the primary showed green, who never assumed that a system was safe simply because it had been safe the last 17 times. He had a lot of thoughts about the Vethra system. He wanted to prep the med bay. The Velhari, as a species, were roughly bipedal, which was where their similarity to humans ended, and the divergence became rapidly more interesting. They averaged about 2 meters tall. Their exoskeletal structure made them look, to human eyes, somewhere between an insect and a deep-sea creature. Plates of iridescent chitin layering over a soft inner body. For upper limbs, 2 lower, a cluster of sensory organs at the top of the head that function like eyes and ears simultaneously. They communicated through a combination of subsonic vibration and chemical signaling, which the translation matrices had spent 40 years learning to handle with any accuracy. They were also, by the majority assessment of the Galactic Accord's diplomatic records, profoundly territorial, fiercely proud, and constitutionally incapable of asking for help from species they considered inferior. The signal was therefore, by itself, alarming. The Velhari did not broadcast distress signals. The Velhari did not ask. The fact that someone in the Vethra system had sent 17 packets in the emergency sequence meant that whatever was happening out there had moved past the point where pride was a viable survival strategy. Core began picking up secondary data 2 hours into the burn. Hull fragments, dispersed across a debris field roughly 8,000 kilometers wide. Chemical signatures consistent with Velhari atmosphere processors, the kind installed on colony ships and deep station habitats. Thermal readings that suggested at least one large structure still held atmosphere, but barely. Structural integrity projections that Cord prefaced with the phrase, "Please note significant uncertainty in the following estimates," which was Cord's way of saying it was doing its best, but the math was not encouraging. How many? Yara asked. Life signs consistent with approximately 40 Velhari. Possibly more. The interference from the debris field is making precision difficult. A pause. There is also significant energy weapon scarring on the debris fragments I have been able to analyze. The bridge went quiet. Someone shot them, Rick has said. The evidence suggests a sustained weapons engagement, yes. Who? Unknown. The weapon signatures do not match any Velhari armament profile in my database, nor any species registered with the Accord. Another pause. This is either a rogue faction, an unregistered vessel, or a species not yet in our records. Yara absorbed this. She had a way of absorbing bad information that the crew had always found quietly reassuring. Not because she minimized it, but because she never looked surprised by it. As though she had already, somewhere in the structure of her thinking, made room for the possibility that things would be bad, and was simply confirming the specific flavor of bad that today had chosen. So something attacked a Velhari installation, she said, possibly killed most of them, left some alive, left, and the survivors broadcast a distress signal. That is the current interpretation, yes. Are they still in the system? Whoever did this, I am detecting no active propulsion signatures consistent with a third party. However, at this range and with this interference, I cannot confirm absence. Meaning they might have left, or they might be waiting quiet. Yes. Jose had come up from the med bay. He stood at the edge of the bridge, listening. Yara glanced at him. Still won't tell me to turn around? She asked. Not unkindly. I was going to ask, he said carefully, if we have any weapons. We have 2-point defense turrets rated for debris clearance and one emergency plasma lance that I'm pretty sure Vasquez has been cannibalizing for parts. So that's a no. That's a we'll be careful. He thought about that. He thought about 40 Velhari life signs in a debris field. He thought about weapon scarring on hull fragments. He thought about the fact that whoever had done this had done it thoroughly, and then either left or was sitting dark, watching. We'll be careful, he agreed, and went back to the med bay. They dropped out of full burn 4 hours from the debris field, which gave Cord enough time to build a clearer picture. The picture was not good. The installation had been a Velhari deep space refueling and communications hub, which made it strategically important and explained why someone had wanted it destroyed. The main structure was still intact, but had taken catastrophic damage to its primary power core. It was running on emergency reserves. The atmosphere was thinning. At current depletion rates, Cord estimated 31 hours before the life support failed entirely. 31 hours. 40 lives. Yara, open a channel. The Velhari response came 11 minutes later, which told her 2 things. The communications array was damaged, and someone over there was alive and operating it manually, which required considerably more effort than standard automated response. The voice that came through, filtered through the translation matrix, stripped of its subsonic components, rendered into something approximating standard Accord interlingua, was flat with control pain and something that the matrix flagged with a small uncertainty percentage attached as humiliation. This is Facility Commander Threxvoth of the Velhari Sovereignty. Identify. Captain Yaris Olis, GSV Unbroken Meridian, operating under Galactic Accord Emergency Response Protocol. She kept her voice level. Easy. The voice she used when someone needed to trust her and did not particularly want to. We received your signal, Commander. We're coming to help. Silence. Longer than communications lag explained. You are human. I am. Another silence. She let sit. She did not apologize for being human. She did not explain it. She just let it sit in the channel like something that was simply true and did not require negotiation. We have wounded, the commander said finally. The word sounded like it cost something. 41 survivors. 17 critical. Understood. I have a medical team standing by. Request permission to approach and dock. Your vessel. Its armament classification. Point defense, and 1 emergency plasma lance. We're a survey ship, Commander. We don't carry weapons we'd use on anyone who didn't shoot at us first. A third silence. Then approach. Docking port 7 is functional. The others are compromised. Copy that. ETA, 4 hours. Keep your people breathing, Commander. We're coming. She closed the channel and sat for a moment with her hands on the console. Behind her, Rikus said, very quietly, Yara, the Harmon Station incident. What actually happened there? She was quiet for a second. A Velhari patrol vessel fired on a human transport that strayed into their territory. Killed 63 people. Rika was quiet. We're going anyway, she said. It was not a question or an invitation to debate. It was the same simple ordering of facts. 63 dead in 4,419. 41 alive right now in a dying station. The math was not complicated. The unbroken meridian continued its approach. 4 hours was a long time, and no time at all. Vasquez confirmed the docking clamps were functional, cursed at them extensively as a precautionary measure, and declared them ready. The med bay had been expanded into the forward cargo hold. 12 emergency beds, everything the ship's fabricator had been able to produce in 4 hours of running at capacity, which was more than Yara had expected and slightly less than she'd hoped for. The team was Dr. Amara Chun and 2 medically trained crew members who had cross-trained specifically because Yara believed that everyone on a long-haul survey vessel should know enough medicine to keep someone alive until the real doctor arrived. The thing no one said out loud, but everyone was aware of, was that no one on the Unbroken Meridian had treated a Velhari patient before. They had the Accord's xenobiology database. They had Cord, who had read the database and could relay relevant information in real time. They had the translation matrix, which Dr. Chun had spent the 4 hours priming with Velhari medical terminology that the matrix flagged as 68% reliable, which was the kind of number that made you proceed carefully and hope. They docked at port 7 without incident. The airlock opened. The smell hit first. Not unpleasant, exactly, but foreign in the specific way that reminded every human present that this was not a human space. Mineral. Something slightly metallic. Something else underneath it that Cord identified as the chemical component of Velhari distress signaling, ambient and uncontrolled, which meant the survivors inside were scared in a way they could not currently suppress. 41 scared Velhari. Facility Commander Threxvoth was waiting at the airlock. He was larger than the database pictures had suggested, which was either individual variation or the database pictures being old. One of his upper limbs was held at an angle that Cord quietly informed Yara was consistent with a fracture in the equivalent of the shoulder joint. He was standing anyway. He stood the way certain people stand when they're in serious pain and have decided that sitting down is not something that their position in the world currently permits. He looked at her. She looked at him. Across the gap of every incident, every border dispute, every trade negotiation gone wrong, every entry in the diplomatic record that said humans and Velhari do not get along, they looked at each other. "Commander," she said. "Captain," he said, "where are your critical cases?" He turned and led her inside without another word. The station was a wreck. That was the only accurate description. Not a dramatic wreck, not a cinematic ruin, but the specific kind of wreck that spoke of systems failing incrementally, of emergency protocols holding the line by margins that got smaller every hour. Lights were wrong. Some too bright, some dark, the emergency strips doing their best in the gaps. The air was thin enough that Yara was already aware of her own breathing in a way she usually was not. 41 survivors in corridors that had been designed for 300. She cataloged it all. She filed it. She went to work. Dr. Chen was already kneeling beside the first critical patient before they reached the makeshift triage area, Cord's voice in her earpiece, translating the xenobiology database into real-time guidance. 68% reliable. The other 32% requiring her best professional judgment applied to a species she had never treated. She applied it. This was the part that did not make it into diplomatic records. The part that did not make it into incident reports, or trade negotiations, or the dry language of accord resolutions. 11 humans in a dying Velhari station, working, not because they were ordered to, not because there was a treaty requiring it, not because the math of interspecies relations made it advantageous, because someone had been hurt, because 41 lives were 31 hours from becoming 41 bodies, because Yara Solis had heard a distress signal at 3:14 while eating rice and reading a repair manifest, and had set down her fork. Threxvoth watched the human doctor work on his people. He watched the human engineer rig an emergency patch to the failing atmosphere processor without being asked, hauling equipment from the unbroken meridian with an efficiency that suggested she had been calculating what she'd need since before the ship docked. He watched the human captain coordinate all of it from the center of the triage area, calm, focused, the voice she used carrying the particular quality of someone who had decided that the situation being difficult was simply a condition they were operating under, not a reason to slow down. He was Velhari. He had grown up with a specific understanding of what humans were. The Accord files, the incidents, the reputation the Deathworlders had earned across centuries of contact. Reckless, aggressive, incomprehensible in their appetites, frightening in their endurance, capable of violence that other species still used as a scale by which to measure bad. He watched Yara Solis organize the rescue of his people. He did not have words for what he was currently experiencing. The translation matrix, if it had been running on his internal state, would have flagged the output with a substantial uncertainty percentage and several editorial notes about the limits of cross-species emotional mapping. He had one functional upper limb. He went to help move a critical patient to the unbroken meridian's expanded med bay. Nobody told him to. He just went. Some things, it turned out, did not require translation. The atmospheric processor held. That was the thing that mattered most in the first 12 hours. Not the med bay, not the triage prioritization, not the 27 decisions Yara made before the ship's clock rolled to 0600. The processor held because Lena Vasquez had taken one look at it, identified 3 specific failure points, cannibalized 2 components from the unbroken meridian's secondary environmental system, and installed them in a configuration that the processor's original Velhari engineers would not have recognized, but which produced the correct result. The air stayed breathable. The temperature stayed viable. The 41 Velhari survivor, the xenobiology database was thorough, which was a relative term. Thorough meant it covered the biology with reasonable accuracy and the medical applications with somewhat less, flagged with the kind of careful uncertainty language that database authors used when they knew something but not quite enough of it. Cord was in her ear the entire time. The third patient's pressure drop is consistent with internal hemorrhage in the equivalent of the thoracic cavity. Based on Velhari physiology, the sealing approach would be, I see it. The tool you're currently using has a blade geometry that may cord. Yes, Captain. Stop talking and start calculating. I need the pressure differential across the secondary respiratory membrane before I make this cut. A half-second pause. Calculating. Stand by. This was the rhythm they found. Chun making decisions, Cord doing math. The two medically trained crew members, Petrov and Okafor, functioning as hands, and brains were extra hands and brains were needed, which was everywhere simultaneously. The Velhari critical cases were stabilized one by one across 12 hours that felt like 3 or 30, depending on the moment and the patient. 4 of the 17 were, in a language of medical honesty, probably going to make it. 11 were definitely going to make it. 2 were uncertain in ways that the database and Cord's calculations could not resolve, because medicine at the edges of what a species can survive is not a math problem. It is a judgment problem, and judgment has margins of error that do not fit neatly into a percentage. She made the calls. She made them without flinching, which was not the same as making them without feeling the weight of them. She simply knew, with the clinical certainty of someone who had spent 12 years in emergency medicine, that flinching was a thing you did later, in private, when the patients were stable and the work was done. She did not flinch. Threxvoth watched the humans work and tried to recalibrate everything he knew. This was not a simple task. The things he knew about humans had been organized over the course of his life into a coherent structure. Not a hateful structure, not exactly, but a wary one. The diplomatic incidents. The Harmon Station engagement, which from the Velhari side of the record looked less like an unprovoked attack, and more like a territorial miscommunication that had escalated because human ships, when they felt cornered, responded with a speed and decisiveness that the Velhari patrol commander had not anticipated and had not been able to de-escalate before it became fatal for both sides. 63 dead in the transport, 9 dead in the patrol. The Accord had issued a resolution. The resolution had used careful language. The careful language had not brought anyone back. He had grown up knowing that humans were dangerous, that they were unpredictable, that they had survived on a planet that, by the metrics the Accord used to classify worlds, should have killed them several times over, a high-gravity, high-pathogen, extreme weather environment that produced creatures calibrated for endurance and aggression and a stubborn resistance to the concept of giving up. The Velhari classification for Earth was Deathworld, Category 3. The classification for humans, accordingly, was something that did not translate precisely into standard Accord interlingua, but which meant, approximately, handle carefully. Do not corner. Do not provoke. Assume worst-case response time and worst-case capability. Threxvoth had handled humans carefully his entire career. He was watching a human woman in a surgical environment make cut decisions on Velhari anatomy that Velhari doctors in a fully equipped facility would have approached with considerably more deliberation. And he was watching her get it right. Not because she was infallible. Cord's running log, which Threxvoth had quietly requested access to, and which the captain had granted without comment, showed 23 instances where Chun had started a procedure, assessed new information, and changed her approach mid-action. But changed was the operative word. She did not stop. She did not freeze. She processed the new information and moved. This, he thought, was perhaps the thing the Accord files never quite captured. It was not that humans were reckless. It was that the gap between assessing danger and acting anyway was in humans almost vanishingly small. Other species had that gap filled with deliberation, consultation, protocol review. Humans seemed to have filled it with something else, something that the translation matrix would have struggled with. He went to find the captain. She was in the station's main operations room, which currently looked like a logistics command center, which it had apparently become without anyone formally deciding that. Ose Mensa was at one console, cross-referencing the debris field data with Cord's projections. Riku Tanaka was at another, running communication diagnostics on the damaged array, and The quiet, steady progress he was making on it was the kind of work that required genuine technical skill applied with genuine patience. Yara Solis was in the center, looking at a holographic display of the station's remaining structural integrity, and she had the focused expression of someone solving a problem by making it slightly smaller every time they looked at it. "Commander," she said, without looking up. "How's your shoulder?" He stopped. He had been moving carefully. He had not believed the injury was visible in his posture. "Functional," he said. "Dr. Chun can later." He moved to stand beside her, looking at the display. "The structural concern you are examining. The impact that took out your primary power core also compromised the main load-bearing member on Deck 4. It's holding, but if anything else shifts, another impact, a pressure variance, it could cascade. I'm trying to figure out if we can reinforce it from the inside with materials we have available, or if we need to start prioritizing evacuation of that section." He studied the display. He knew this station. He had been its commander for 4 Velhari years, which was approximately 7 by Terran reckoning. He knew where every load-bearing member ran. He knew which ones were more critical than the structural analysis suggested, because the structural analysis reflected the original design, and the original design had been modified twice in ways that the official documentation had not fully captured, because bureaucracy was a universal constant. "Deck 4, Bay 12, he said. "There is a secondary support frame the repair crew installed in 4419 that does not appear in the database. Is sharing load with the compromised member. If the compromised member fails, the secondary will hold. Not indefinitely, but long enough for evacuation." She looked at him. "How confident are you in that?" "I watched it installed. I signed the inspection report." A pause. "I was thorough." A very small shift in her expression. Not quite a smile. The thing that happens to a face before a smile arrives. "Then we prioritize reinforcement and keep evacuation as the backup." She looked back at the display. "I'd feel better with a second opinion on the secondary frame. I will show your engineer. She'll want to see it herself." "Yes," he said, as though this was obvious, as though of course the human engineer would want to see the thing with her own eyes rather than taking a verbal description, and the slight adjustment in his tone was the closest thing to warmth that the translation matrix could reliably convey. "I assume the attack had come from a species called, in the Velhari records, the Shreth. This was not a name the Unbroken Meridians database contained. Accord searched it and returned nothing. The Galactic Accord's central database, which Yara accessed through the relay connection Riku had restored, contained 2 references, both brief, both filed under unconfirmed contact reports, the Accord's category for something happened here, but we're not sure what. The first reference was 11 years old. The second was 7. Both were from remote systems at the edge of the outer spur. Threxvoth provided the briefing in the operations room. Standing at the display, his injured shoulder still held carefully. His surviving officers, 2 of them, out of 8, stood behind him. The rest of the senior staff were dead or critical. "The Shreth," he said, "have been a theoretical concern for the Velhari sovereignty for approximately a decade. Their territory, as best as our survey data can determine, lies beyond the current edge of Accord map space. We have had 3 confirmed contacts. Each time, they withdrew before meaningful exchange was possible." A pause that carried weight. "We now believe the withdrawals were assessments. They were figuring out what you were," Osei said. "Yes. And then they decided to attack. They struck 4 installations simultaneously, 14 hours before your arrival. This facility. 3 others." He paused. "The others did not broadcast. The room absorbed this. For installations. 1 broadcasting. 3 not. The 3 that did not broadcast were either destroyed before anyone could reach the communications array, or their crews had made a different calculation about the value of broadcasting. Both possibilities were grim in their own way." "Do you know their current position?" Yara asked. "Our long-range sensors were among the first systems destroyed. We have their last known trajectory. They withdrew along bearing 63 Mark II after the attack. Beyond that, no." "Were they after?" "Threxvoth's sensory cluster, the organ cluster that the database described as fulfilling the function of eyes and ears, oriented toward her in a way that the translation matrix flagged as assessing, as though he was deciding something about how much to say. The Velhari sovereignty controls 14 refueling hubs along the outer spur," he said. "If all 14 are destroyed or captured, the Accord's logistics chain through this region collapses. Supply lines from the inner systems to the outer colonies become unsustainable. Any species trying to hold territory in the outer spur would find it untenable within a standard year. They're not trying to kill you. Yara said. They're trying to move you. Yes. Move everyone. Clear the outer spur. That is our current assessment. She was quiet for a moment. She was looking at the display, but in the way she looked at things when she was not really seeing them, when the looking was just the external expression of internal calculation. The crew knew this mode. They waited. Cord, she said. Yes, Captain. The Shreth withdrawal bearing. 6-3 Mark II. Where does that trajectory intersect with known navigation routes if you run it out 200 light hours? A half-second pause. Bearing 6-3 Mark II intersects the secondary approach route to the Vethra Relay Hub, the civilian communications relay, not the military one. The relay services 63 registered colonies in the outer spur. And if that relay goes down, the colonies would have emergency communication capability only. No long-range coordination. No ability to request accord assistance in any time frame that would be operationally useful. She looked at Threxvoth. They're going for the relay next. He was quiet for one moment. We have no assets to deploy. No communications to send. You have restored partial function to this array, but it cannot reach Accord Naval Command at any useful speed. No, she said, but it can reach the other humans in this region. This time, the pause was longer. His sensory cluster oriented toward her again in the same assessing way. How many human vessels operate in the outer spur? Survey and transport? Probably 40, 50, maybe more depending on the season. She paused. Plus, the Accord has 2 naval patrol ships on standing assignment to this sector. The Resolute and the Kadam. 2 naval vessels. Against a force that destroyed 4 Velhari installations in a coordinated strike. Against a force, she said, that has never met a human naval response. There was something in the room then that the translation matrix could not quantify, something that moved between the Velhari commander and the human captain that was not language and not data. He had read the Accord files on human military engagements, not the polite summaries. The full reports because he was thorough, because he had always believed in knowing what you were neighboring. He had read about the early contact wars. He had read about the 3 major interstellar conflicts humans have been involved in across the last 2 centuries, and what had characterized human military response in each of them. Speed of escalation beyond predicted parameters. Endurance beyond predicted parameters. Tactical creativity under resource constraint beyond predicted parameters. Well, to continue engagement at casualty rates that would cause other species to seek terms. He had read all of it. He had filed it under handle carefully. Do not corner, do not provoke. Someone had cornered them. Make your call, he said. She was already opening the communications array. The message went out on 14 frequencies simultaneously, which was a maximum the repaired array could manage. It went out in human standard encoding, in the priority format used by Accord Naval Command, and it said, stripped of the technical protocol language, reduced to its essential content. The following. Unknown hostile force has attacked multiple Velhari installations in the Vethra system and adjacent space. Force is advancing toward the outer spur relay hub. Casualties confirmed. Further attacks anticipated. All available vessels in sector respond. Accord naval assets. Priority intercept requested. This is Captain Yara Solis, GSV Unbroken Meridian. Distress declaration active. Requesting all aid. She sent it. She leaned back. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Riku, from his console, said, Do you think anyone will come? She thought about this with the same seriousness with which she thought about everything. We came, she said. Someone broadcast. We came. He thought about that. Fair point. The message traveled outward at the speed of light wave communications, which was fast enough to cross 200 light hours in a time that was meaningful. In the outer spur, where survey vessels ran long routes, and naval patrols made wide loops, and nobody was ever quite as far from anyone else as the distances suggested, fast enough was a variable that sometimes collapsed into almost immediate. On the GSV Resolute, an Accord naval patrol ship currently running a standard loop through the outer edge of the sector, a communications officer received the signal at 11:47 ship time and immediately escalated it to the command deck. On the Kadam, her sister ship, the same signal arrived 4 minutes later. On 17 survey and transport vessels of various registry and species crewing, the signal arrived across the next 2 hours, distributed by relay propagation. On 6 of those vessels, the crews were human. The human crews did not hold discussions. They did not convene committees. They did not send queries back asking for clarification on the threat assessment or the legal framework of the engagement or whether the Accord had formally declared the situation a crisis-level event. They changed course. All 6 of them, within 20 minutes of receiving the signal, changed course toward the Vethra relay hub. The Resolute and the Katham were already at full burn. In the operations room of the damaged Velhari installation, Core tracked the incoming course corrections as the signals propagated back and reported them, one by one, with the quiet diligence it applied to all information. Threxvoth watched the display. He watched it for a long time. "Your people," he said finally, and the translation matrix flagged the sentence as incomplete because whatever he was going to say next had stalled somewhere between thought and language. "They come for strangers." Yara was looking at the display too. "We come for the signal," she said. "Doesn't matter who sends it." He processed this. He had spent a career in Velhari diplomacy understanding the motivations of other species through the lens of interest. What did they want? What did they gain? How did this serve them? He turned it over for Velhari in the context of the signal. They had gained nothing in coming here. They had exposed themselves to a hostile, unknown force. They had stripped their own ship's systems to patch his atmospheric processor. They had treated his wounded with knowledge they had not possessed when they arrived. What did they want? He could not find the answer because the question did not fit. "The relay hub," he said. "If the Shreth reach it." "They're not going to reach it," she said. "You cannot know that." "No," she agreed. "But they broadcast, and we're coming." She said it the same way she said everything, simply, without drama, as though it was just a fact about the shape of the situation, which Threxvoth was beginning to understand it was. He decided, quietly and without announcing it, that he would like to not be on the wrong side of this species if he could avoid it. He had a feeling, watching the incoming course corrections accumulate on the display, that a great many others were about to reach the same conclusion. Commander Petra Volkova of the GSV Resolute had a reputation that preceded her into every briefing room she walked into, which she had always found mildly irritating because reputations were summaries, and summaries by definition left out the parts that did not fit the narrative cleanly. The summary of Volkova was brilliant, difficult, aggressive, the kind of officer who won engagements by breaking the playbook and then writing a better one in real time. What the summary left out was that she was also, in the specific way of people who had been doing hard things for a long time, deeply tired of loss. Not tired of the fight, tired of what the fight cost. She read the signal from the unbroken meridian twice. Then, she pulled the Velhari xenobiology file, the Shreth contact reports, the outer spur installation map, and the relay hub structural specifications. She read all of it on the way to the bridge, moving through the corridors at the pace of someone who has concluded that urgency is a state of mind applied to everything simultaneously. She did not run. She moved like a current moves, smooth, consistent, unstoppable. "Navigation," she said before she was fully through the bridge door. "Already plotted, Commander. Full burn. Intercept course for the relay hub." She looked at her navigation officer. He had pulled the course the moment the signal arrived, before she reached the bridge, because he had served with her for 2 years and had learned to read the direction of things. She nodded once. He had done it right. "Communications, contact the Katham." "She's already on the line, Commander." Commander Deshi Obi of the Katham appeared on the split-screen display, and he was already in his command chair, already at full burn, already 3 steps into the same calculation Volkova was running. They had served together for 6 years before being assigned different ships, and they operated with the efficiency of people who had already had most of their arguments about tactics and procedure and reached functional, if occasionally still contested, conclusions. Volkova. OB. Shreth 4 strength. Unknown. Destroyed 4 Velhari installations with apparent ease. That's all we have. Weapons profile. Cord on the unbroken meridian analyzed weapons scarring. I'm sending you the file. It doesn't match anything in the database. Unknown enemy. Unknown weapons. Certain hostile intent. He paused. And we have 2 patrol ships, 6 survey vessels that change course, and 1 extremely determined survey captain who is currently sitting on a dying Velhari station having a very interesting day. That's the situation, yes. Do we have a plan? We will have one before we arrive, she said. We have 16 hours. 16 hours is a lot of plan. Good. We'll need it. The relay hub was, structurally, less impressive than its function suggested. It was a hub in the practical sense, a junction point, a nerve ending, a location whose importance was entirely a function of its position in a network rather than anything intrinsic to its physical form. It was not large. It was not heavily armed. It had a small permanent staff of 12, currently cycling through a shift that had become considerably more interesting when the threat assessment from the Velhari Sovereignty's military arm had come through the backup channels 4 hours after the attack. Hub Administrator Rhea Koss had spent those 4 hours doing 3 things simultaneously: organizing her staff's emergency protocols, attempting to reach a core naval command through channels that were already becoming degraded as the outlying relay nodes went quiet, and thinking very carefully about what she was willing to do and what she was not willing to do if the worst-case scenario arrived at her door. She had 12 staff members. She had defensive systems rated for debris and micrometeorite clearance. She had one emergency message that had gone out through the Vethra installation relay, and which she had to trust was reaching the right people because she could not confirm it. She had 16 hours. She used 8 of them to reconfigure the relay hub's sensor array, designed for communication signal amplification, into the best early warning system she could build with the hardware she had. It was technically a misuse of the equipment. It was also the most practical decision she had made in her professional life. She used 4 more hours to catalog everything on the hub that could be used in a way its designers had not intended, which was something she had been doing casually her entire career in a way that people who have spent time in remote postings develop an instinct for this object has more uses than its label says. The results were not dramatic, but they were real. She had options. They were not military options. They were the options of someone who understood that the line between an emergency tool and a weapon is, in a pinch, primarily a matter of application. She used the last 4 hours to sleep because she had learned that the decision to sleep when you still could was the most undervalued tactical choice in the history of emergency response. When her alarm woke her 8 hours before the Resolute and Kadam arrived, she was ready. Volkova's plan, built across 16 hours of consultation with Obi, with cord relayed data from the Unbroken Meridian, and with the input of every tactical resource she had available, was elegant in the specific way that practical plans are elegant. Not because it was beautiful, but because it had no unnecessary parts. The Shreth, based on the attack pattern at the Velhari installations, preferred overwhelming force applied fast. They did not appear to have used stealth. The installation sensor data, pieced together from the Unbroken Meridian's analysis, showed the Shreth vessels appearing on sensors, assessing briefly, and then attacking. Not a long surveillance period, not a patient operation, a blitz, which meant they were confident, which meant they had not yet encountered meaningful resistance, which meant Volkova thought they had not yet met anyone who hit back. "Here's what we know," she said to the command staff of both ships on the joint channel. "They're fast. They're aggressive. They think this is going to be easy because so far it has been. They have not fought anyone who changes the math on them mid-engagement." She paused. "We are going to change the math." The plan had 4 components. The first was positioning. The Resolute and Kadam would not wait at the relay hub. They would meet the Shreth force at the outer edge of the sensor detection range, where the engagement would be on their terms rather than the Shreth's. The second was the 6 survey vessels, which were not military ships and were not pretending to be. They would be positioned to provide sensor coverage, communications relay, and emergency evacuation of the relay hub staff. They would not fight. Their presence would force the Shreth to account for them, however, which changed the geometric calculations of the engagement in ways that were useful. The third component was Administrator Koss and her sensor array, which Volkova had spoken to her about directly and which Koss had quietly, competently repurposed into an early warning and targeting assistance system that would give both naval ships an information advantage they would not otherwise have had. The fourth component was the thing that Volkova did not explain in the briefing, because it was not a tactic. It was a fact about the situation. The fact was, the Shreth had attacked 4 Velhari installations and expected to finish the job quickly, before anyone could organize a response. They had not anticipated that a human survey ship would be close enough to receive the distress signal. They had not anticipated that the response would be organized. They had not anticipated any of this, which meant they were arriving at the relay hub expecting something that was no longer true. The thing about fighting someone who has not updated their expectations is that their expectations become a weapon you can use against them. The Shreth arrived early. Not dramatically early, 4 hours before the Resolute, and Kadam reached optimal position rather than the 16 they had planned for. The reason for this was not clear from the sensor data, though Cord analysis suggested the most probable explanation was simply that the Shreth had moved faster than the human ships had modeled, which was useful information to have and somewhat inconvenient timing for having it. Administrator Kasa's early warning system detected them first. She had the signal to both naval ships 12 minutes before the Shreth came within their own sensor range. 12 minutes was not the 16 hours they had planned with. It was not nothing, either. Volkova and Obi made adjustments. The survey vessels repositioned. Kasa activated the targeting assistance function she had built into the array and hoped it worked the way she thought it did, because she had not had an opportunity to test it. The Shreth force was 6 ships. Their design, captured in the sensor data and analyzed by Cord in real time, was unlike anything in the database. Elongated, angular propulsion systems that suggested a different engineering philosophy than either human or Velhari design. They did not appear to carry conventional shielding by Cord standards. They carried something else, a field effect that Cord flagged as anomalous and possibly energy dispersive, which was the database's way of saying it had never seen this before and was making its best guess. 6 ships, 2 naval vessels, 16 hours of planning compressed into 12 minutes of adjustment. The Shreth led with a sensor sweep. Standard practice, identify the targets before committing. The sweep returned data about the Resolute and Kadam that the Shreth commanders processed and found, apparently, consistent with a threat worth addressing, but not one requiring extraordinary concern. 2 military vessels. Known configuration. Assessed, presumably, as manageable. The Shreth did not know what the Resolute and Kadam had been doing for 16 hours. They did not know about Kasa's array. They did not know about the positioning of the survey vessels on the sensor perimeter. They did not know about the targeting feed that was already flowing from the array into the navigation computers of both ships, giving them a precision advantage that partially compensated for the numerical disadvantage. They did not know any of this because they had not anticipated that the humans would have had time to prepare. They had not anticipated the preparation because they had moved fast, and fast was the thing that had worked on every species they had encountered so far. Volkova opened a channel to Obi. "Ready," she said. "Ready," he said. She looked at the display. 6 ships for minutes from weapons range. 2 ships on an intercept course. 12 minutes of adjusted planning. Kasa's array feeding targeting data into the navigation computers, real-time, 62% estimated reliability, which was the kind of percentage you accepted when 62 was the number you had, and the alternative was nothing. She thought about 31-hour air supplies and 41 Velhari survivors, and a survey captain who had set down her fork and changed course. She thought about the 3 installations that had not broadcast. She thought about the colonies this relay served. 63 of them. The people in those colonies who did not know this was happening and would not know until either the relay stayed up or went quiet. "All ships," she said on the joint channel. "Engage." The engagement lasted 53 minutes, which was significantly longer than the Shreth had anticipated based on their previous operations, and significantly shorter than Volkova had planned for in the worst-case scenarios she had built with Obi across the 16 hours they'd had. The targeting data from Kasa's array was not 62% reliable. It was closer to 78, which Cord calculated retrospectively, and which Volkova noted for the post-action report with the specific appreciation of someone who had been building plans on uncertainty and finding the uncertainty was better than predicted. The Shreth energy dispersive field did what Cord had tentatively modeled. It reduced the effectiveness of direct energy weapons. What it did not do was account for the way human naval engineers had spent 2 generations building redundant systems into weapons platforms, because human engineering philosophy had a foundational principle that went something like, assume the thing you're counting on will fail and build accordingly. The Resolute and Kadam both carried kinetic delivery systems as secondary armaments, low-tech by Cord standards, slower, requiring closer engagement range. Volkova had noted this in the 16-hour planning session and had structured the engagement to force the Shreth to close range faster than they wanted to. The Shreth had fast ships. Human naval tactical doctrine, when you needed to force an opponent to close range, involved making the center position untenable from distance while keeping the flanks clear, a structure that essentially left the opponent with a choice between retreating or coming in and made retreating costly enough that coming in looked better. This was not new. It was in various forms, as old as naval warfare. Volkova had studied it in the history courses that were mandatory for a core naval command track. She had also studied the specific ways it had failed across history and had built the counter-failures into the plan. The Shreth chose to come in. 53 minutes later, 2 of their 6 ships were destroyed, 1 was disabled and drifting, and 3 had withdrawn along bearing 6-3 Mark II in the same direction they had come from. The Kadam had taken damage to her port propulsion array. No casualties. The Resolute had taken damage to her forward sensor cluster and had a hull breach in a non-critical section. 2 crew members with injuries, non-fatal. 1 minor hull breach repaired by the damage control team before the engagement ended, which Volkova noted in the post-action report as excellent performance by the DC crew under fire, because it was, and she was thorough about credit as well as accountability. The relay hub was intact. Koss was in the array room when the all-clear came through. She had been in it for the entire 53 minutes, monitoring the targeting feed, adjusting calibrations in real time as the engagement developed in ways she could not fully follow on the sensor data, but could infer from the targeting request patterns, try to give the 2 naval ships the best possible version of the information her repurposed equipment could provide. When the all-clear came, she sat down. Not because she was exhausted, though she was, because sitting down was the body's way of processing the fact that the thing you were braced for had passed. She sat in the array room with the displays still running, showing the debris where 2 Shreth ships had been, showing the 3 withdrawal signatures moving steadily away, showing the Resolute, and caught them holding position at the engagement coordinates. Her hands were entirely steady. She noted this with the slight detachment of someone taking stock. Steady hands. Good. The operational mindset was still running, and she let it run for a few more minutes before she did the thing she had been not doing for 53 minutes, which was allowing herself to feel what was happening. She had 12 staff members. All 12 were safe. The relay was up. 63 colonies in the outer spur could talk to each other and to the rest of the Accord. She did not cry. She was not, by nature, a person who cried when things worked out. She cried sometimes when they did not, in private, later, which was when crying started to function. Right now it did not. What she felt instead was a kind of deep-grained satisfaction, the kind that does not announce itself loudly but sits in the chest, and is warm there. She had done the thing that needed doing with the thing she had. She had done it well enough. Hub command to Resolute, she said, into the channel. Administrator Koss here. All hub systems are operational. Relay is fully functional. You should know that your targeting assistance feed accounted for approximately 40 additional data points compared to what I initially modeled. I'll send you the calibration log. It might be useful for your post-action report. A pause. Then, Volkova's voice. Administrator. Are all your people safe? All 12. Yes. You build a targeting system out of a communications array. I repurpose some functions, yes. In 8 hours. 8.5, if we're being precise. The initial calibration took longer than I expected. Another pause, and Koss had the impression that Volkova was doing something with her expression that did not come through on audio. Good work, Administrator. Outstanding work. Koss allowed herself a small, private acknowledgement of this. Then, she got up and went to check on her staff because they had been doing hard things too, and leadership was, in her experience, substantially about remembering that. On the Unbroken Meridian, at the Vethra installation, Yara received the all-clear from the Resolute at 22:31 ship time. She was in the operations room. Threxvoth was beside her. They had been watching the sensor data relayed through Koss's array. Imperfect, fragmented, good enough to follow the shape of what was happening, if not the precise details. When the all-clear came, she leaned back in the chair and exhaled. Threxvoth was quiet for a moment. The relay is secure, he said. Yes. 3 Shreth vessels withdrew. Yes. They will report what happened. They will return with more assets, or they will not. They may have concluded that this region presents more resistance than their assessment projected. He paused. We do not know which. No, she agreed. We don't. Your people, he said, and stopped again the same way he had stopped before, at the thing that did not have a clean conclusion in language. He tried again. They came. Immediately. With 2 ships, and survey vessels, and an administrator with a repurposed array. Someone sent a signal, she said. Yes. But he was quiet for a moment, and she waited because she had learned over the past 31 hours that the space between his thoughts was something to respect rather than fill. We sent the signal because we had no other option. We did not expect. We did not believe that what we received would be. What did you expect? She asked, genuinely curious. He considered. Deliberation, he said. Process. Consultation with Accord Command before any resource commitment. A response measured in days, not hours. This is what we would do. What most species would do. He looked at her. The sensory cluster oriented toward her with the kind of attention she had come to read as direct and serious. You arrived in 9 hours. Someone was hurt, she said. It came out the same way it had come out before. The simple organization of facts. The rest of it, the deliberation, the process, all of that was going to happen anyway on the back end. But first, someone was hurt and needed help right now, and the distance was 9 hours, so we came in 9 hours. He was quiet for what felt like a long time. I have commanded this facility for 7 Terran years, he said finally. I have dealt with representatives of 41 species in that time, in the context of diplomatic exchange, trade negotiation, territorial dispute, and emergency coordination. A pause. I have never had a conversation that required me to revise my understanding of a species as significantly as this one. She looked at him sideways. Is that a compliment? It is an observation, he said, but the translation matrix flagged a secondary indicator that the database categorized as the Velhari equivalent of right acknowledgement, and Yara filed it away as close enough to a yes. Get your shoulder looked at, she said. Dr. Chen's cleared her critical cases. She'll have time now. He went. She watched him go. She looked at the display. The relay hub intact, the engagement coordinates showing 2 Shreth debris signatures, 3 withdrawal tracks pointing into the dark at the edge of the map space. They would come back. Probably. With more. That was usually how it worked, when something unexpected met you in the dark, and you hit it, and it had to recalibrate. But they would come back to a different situation than they'd left. They would come back to a Velhari sovereignty that had sent a distress signal and received in response 9 hours of travel time, and 2 naval ships, and a repurposed communications array, and 11 humans running through a dying station with medical equipment, and hole patch kits, and zero tolerance for the concept of letting 41 people die because the diplomatic history was complicated. They would come back to that. She was not afraid of what they would find when they did. The Accord emergency session convened 48 hours after the relay hub engagement, which was fast by Accord standards. Accord standards for emergency convening had been written by committee, which meant they were precise, procedurally thorough, and structured to prevent exactly the kind of unilateral, fast-moving response that had just saved the relay hub and 41 Velhari lives. The irony of this was not lost on anyone in the session room, though most of them were too diplomatic to say so directly. Ambassador Kreeth of the Velhari sovereignty said it directly. She was older than Threxvoth by what the Velhari counted as 2 cycles, roughly 18 Terran years, and she had spent those years in Accord diplomatic chambers, developing a reputation for saying the precise thing that made the most people uncomfortable in the most productive way. She was currently making most of the session room uncomfortable by reading aloud, in careful sequence, the timeline of events from the Vethra attack to the relay hub defense, with emphasis on the specific timestamps. The distress signal was broadcast at 3:14 on the Unbroken Meridian's clock, she said. The Unbroken Meridian changed course at 3:17. She paused to let this sit. The Accord Emergency Protocol for Distress Response authorizes a minimum assessment period of 72 hours before mandatory resource commitment. Silence in the session room. The human vessel, she continued, committed its resources in 3 minutes. The silence continued. I'm not suggesting this was incorrect, she said. I am suggesting that the differential between 3 minutes and 72 hours is a gap worth examining. This session was called to determine how the Accord should respond to the Shreth threat. I suggest that we begin that determination by understanding why the response that actually worked looked nothing like the response our protocols would have produced. She sat down. The session room did the thing that session rooms do after someone says the thing that was being thought, but not said. A collective adjustment of posture, a redistribution of attention, the sound of a conversation that had been circling its real subject finally arriving at it. Yara was not in the session room. She was in a smaller meeting room 2 corridors away at a long table with Commander Volkova, Commander Obi, Administrator Koss, and a Velhari military liaison whose name the translation matrix rendered as Vethsar, and whose rank insignia placed him high enough in the sovereignty's command structure that his presence in this meeting rather than the main session was itself a statement about priorities. Threxvoth was there too. His shoulder was in a medical support brace. Dr. Chen's work, the result of 2 hours of careful treatment the previous day, the kind of treatment that Threxvoth had apparently found deeply strange to receive from a human doctor and deeply effective in its results. He moved better. He held himself differently. He had not said anything about this directly, but he had spent a portion of the previous day in conversation with Dr. Chan about Velhari and human physiological overlaps, which Shun had described to Yara as one of the most interesting conversations she'd had in 3 years on the survey route. The Shreth will return, Vethsar said. He had the directness of military officers across species, which was one of those constants of organizational necessity that Ose had once written a small paper about during a long survey transit. The 3 vessels that withdrew will have transmitted engagement data to their command structure. The data will show that the relay hub defense was more difficult than the initial Velhari station attacks. The response will be either to increase force commitment or to change approach. Or both, Volkova said. Or both, he agreed. The question before this meeting is, what do we have available to respond to a substantially larger Shreth force? This was a different question from the one being asked in the main session room. The main session was asking what should we do. This room was asking what can we do. Yara had always found the second question more useful, because should was debatable and can was not. 2 naval patrol ships in sector, Obi said. Both took damage. Both are operational, but not at full capacity. The Resolute's sensor cluster is degraded. We can repair it here. I have the parts in inventory, but it takes time. How long? Vethsar asked. Full repair, 40 hours. A functional patch, 6. Do the patch, Yara said. Volkova looked at her. We don't know when they're coming back. We don't. So we do the 6-hour fix, and then start the 40-hour work on top of it. Don't leave a window. Volkova nodded. Agreed. She looked at her navigation officer, who was sitting in the corner taking notes. 6-hour patch first. The Accord is expected to authorize additional naval assets, Vethsar said. The timeline for that authorization, given the session currently underway, is 4 to 6 days, Ambassador Kreith said from the doorway. Everyone looked at her. She had apparently concluded the main session or stepped away from it with the comfort of someone accustomed to moving between rooms where different versions of the same conversation were happening. She came inside, declined the offered chair, and stood with the ease of a person who was standing precisely because she had chosen to. 4 to 6 days, she repeated, is the honest assessment of how long the formal authorization process will take. Given the current political dynamics of the session, I could compress it. I am choosing not to. Vethsar said, Ambassador, because the authorization process exists for reasons, she said. Because we need it fast, so skip the procedure is how good emergency response becomes bad policy. Because the Accord is a structure of agreed rules, and those rules have value even when they're slow, and especially when we're frightened, and the urgency feels like it justifies bypassing them. She paused. However, the room waited. Within existing authorization, the Accord Naval Command can surge 2 additional patrol ships to this sector as a precautionary repositioning. Not a combat deployment, repositioning, which falls under standard standing orders and requires no session vote. She looked at Volkova. Commander, I would recommend making that request within the hour. Volkova was already drafting it on her tablet. She had been drafting it since precautionary repositioning left the ambassador's mouth. The 6-day window, Yaris said. If they come back in that window, then you respond with what you have, Kreith said. As you did before. She looked at Yara with the kind of attention that the translation matrix struggled with, because it carried too many layers to reduce cleanly assessment and something adjacent to respect and something that might have been if the translation matrix had been running with better input recognition. Captain Solis, I have read the engagement record from the Vethra attack and the relay hub defense. I have read Threxvoth's field report, which he filed this morning and which is by the standards of Velhari military documentation, remarkably comprehensive in its description of human behavior under pressure. A small pause. He describes your crew as having operated with what he termed indifference to calibrated risk. He intends this as a compliment. Yara thought about this. He's not wrong, she said. No, he is not. Kreith looked around the room. At Volkova and Obi at Kas at Threxvoth, at the Accord liaison staff have been taking careful notes on everything. I will tell you why I told the main session, which is the thing that I believe is actually worth understanding about what happened here. The Shreth made a strategic error. Not the tactical error, not the weapons assumptions or the engagement geometry. The fundamental error was this. They assumed that attacking a species the humans had a complicated history with would produce a slow response. They assumed that the Harmon Station incident and 100 smaller incidents like it had created enough distance between humans and Velhari that when the Velhari sent a distress signal, humans would not come. She paused. They were wrong. They were wrong because they did not understand what a distress signal means to a human crew. The room was quiet. What does it mean? Cass asked, and it was a genuine question, the kind she asked when she was genuinely curious, which was a quality about her that Yara had come to appreciate over the past 48 hours. I asked Captain Solis the same question, Kreeth said. Last night. She told me. She glanced at Yara, a question in the look. You can say it, Yara said. She said, someone is hurt, and I can help, and the distance is 9 hours, so. Kreeth paused. The sentence ends there. There is no second clause. The logic does not include a calculation of who they are, or what they have done, or whether helping them is advantageous. The sentence ends at so. The action follows immediately. She let it sit in the room. The Shreth do not understand that sentence, she said. When they recalibrate and return, they will be recalibrating around what we have. The ships, the weapons, the tactical arrangements. They will not understand that the deeper problem they have created for themselves is that they broadcast their existence and their intentions into a region of space where humans operate. And now humans know. She looked at Yara one more time. And humans come. The next 72 hours were the kind of hours that felt like a week inside them, and almost nothing in retrospect. The Resolute's sensor cluster got its 6-hour patch in 4.5 hours because the engineering team decided that working faster was better. The 40-hour full repair began immediately after. The 2 additional naval ships authorized under precautionary repositioning orders, the GSV Carthage and the GSV Ikena, acknowledged their new courses and burned toward the sector with the straightforward commitment of ships that had been given clear orders and had no particular desire to be anywhere else. 6 more human survey vessels changed course for the Vethra system when Yar's message, now widely relayed, reached them. They were not military ships. They were not coming to fight. They were coming because the sector was in crisis, and they were in the sector, which was in the informal calculus that operated among long-haul survey crews on the outer spur routes. Reason enough. Volkova organized them. She was direct about what they could and could not usefully do. The survey vessels would cover sensor perimeter positions, maintain communication relay continuity, and be available for evacuation and medical support if needed. She was also direct about what she did not want them to do, which was get in the way of a naval engagement, trying to be helpful, which was a different kind of problem for being unhelpful and usually harder to manage. They accepted this without complaint because survey crews on the outer spur were, as a general category, experienced enough to know the difference between where they were useful and where they were not. Cass rebuilt her array properly. Not the 8.5 hour emergency version. The real version, using the specs she had worked out during the engagement, incorporating the calibration data she had collected in real time, the 78% reliability she had achieved through improvisation now systematized and pushed closer to 89. She filed the technical report with Accord Engineering and sent a copy to Cord on the unbroken Meridian with a note that read, "For your records, in case this situation is relevant to other hubs." Cord acknowledged the file and added it to the emergency protocol database with a note of its own. Source rated highly reliable, tested under operational conditions. The Velhari sovereignty, for its part, was doing something it had essentially never done before in its formal diplomatic history. Asking. Not demanding. Not negotiating from a position of strength. Asking. The Accord formal session, which had continued in parallel with everything else, received a written communication from Ambassador Kreeth on behalf of the sovereignty that used the word request in reference to human naval support, a word that the Accord linguistic analysis team flagged in their summary as extraordinary in context, which was Accord bureaucratic language for this has essentially never happened. The Accord approved the request. It took 3 days instead of 6, because the ambassador had been right that she could compress the timeline, and had decided that after the request had been made with appropriate formality, compressing it was acceptable. The vote was not close. Threxvoth found Yara on the second day, in the section of the station they had been using as a common space, a corridor intersection large enough to sit in, near one of the atmospheric vents that had been repaired, and now pushed warm processed air through the space with a sound like quiet breathing. She was eating. She had food from the Unbroken Meridian's fabricator. Actual rice, actual recognizable food, because the fabricator was still functional, and being a survey ship meant carrying a large food stock. She was reading something on her tablet. She looked up when he came. "Commander," she said. "Captain." He sat across from her. The equivalent motion in Velhari physiology, a folding of the lower limbs into a resting position. "Your ship. She's fine." Vasquez found 3 more things to fix while she was at it. "She's happy." Your engineer is happy when there are things to repair. She's happy when she can make things better than they were. The fixing is just the method. She set down her tablet. "How are your people?" "The critical cases," he paused, and in that pause was something she had learned to read. 2 of them will require extended care. The others are stable. Dr. Chun has provided a detailed handover document for the Velhari medical team that is incoming. She wrote it in Accord Interlingua and included xenobiology database references and her own clinical notes. He was quiet for a moment. Her clinical notes described the decision points where the database was insufficient, and she proceeded on judgment. She documented what led her to each decision. She does that. It's how she thinks. It is extremely useful documentation. He paused again. "I have read it 3 times. Yara looked at him. She thought she understood why, and she let it be what it was rather than naming it. "What happens now from your side?" she asked instead. "Politically, the sovereignty will request a formal military alliance through the Accord structure. It has been discussed before in the abstract. It has never been concretely proposed." He was looking at the vent, the warm air pushing steadily. "It will be proposed now. With humans. The sovereignty does not need an alliance with species we already have alliances with," he said. It was not harsh. It was just exactly true. "You are the species we need the alliance with. Because you came in 9 hours." He looked at her. "And because when the Shreth return, and they will return, the calculation changes if there's a human commitment behind the Velhari border. The Shreth are making strategic assessments. A formal alliance changes what their assessment finds." She thought about this. "It's more than that, though," she said. "An alliance isn't just about changing their calculation. It's about changing yours." He was quiet. "Before the signal," she said, "you would not have asked. Not because you didn't need it. Because asking us specifically was the thing that felt." She searched for the word that was accurate without being unkind. "Impossible." "Yes," he said. "Impossible." "And now?" He was quiet for longer this time. The vent pushed warm air. Somewhere down the corridor, 2 of his surviving staff members were talking in the subsonic vibration register that the translation matrix could not pick up without a dedicated sensor, which meant the conversation was private in the specific way that conversations were private when you were in the same space as people whose physiology could not hear the relevant frequencies. "Now," he said, "I read a human doctor's clinical notes 3 times because they are better documentation of medical decision-making than anything in our own database. And I am sitting in a damaged corridor eating nothing because I'm not hungry and talking to the person who arrived in 9 hours, and I'm trying to find the word for what I am currently experiencing, and I cannot find it in my language or yours." She looked at him. The translation matrix had flagged the sentence for secondary indicators and come back with high uncertainty, possible emotional content, recommend contextual interpretation. "Gratitude," she said. "Sometimes it just doesn't fit in a word." He made a sound that the translation matrix could not parse and labeled non-lexical vocalization, insufficient data. She decided it was the closest thing to agreement it was possible to make when the words were not quite there yet. "When you leave," he said, "where do you go?" "Back en route. We've got sample collection to catch up on. Probably another diplomatic mail drop in the cash-in system." She paused. "Unless something else comes up." "Something else," he said. "There's always something else." She picked up her rice again. "Someone sends a signal. You go." He processed this for a moment. "Captain Solis." "Yeah." "When we send the signal again," he stopped and restarted. "If we send a signal. Any signal." "I know," she said. "We'll come." The warm air moved through the vent. The station breathed its repair breath. 41 Velhari alive in a structure that had been 31 hours from becoming 41 bodies, now connected to an Accord relay that was still transmitting, still up, because somewhere in the dark a human survey captain had set down her fork. The Unbroken Meridian departed the Vethra system on the 4th day, cleared by the incoming Velhari military and Accord support teams that had arrived to take over the long-term stabilization work. The handover was thorough, Vasquez briefed the engineering team on every modification she had made, every component she had sourced from their own ship's inventory, the specs and limitations of each. Dr. Chun briefed the incoming medical personnel for 6 hours, which was 2 hours longer than scheduled, because there were questions that the briefing generated that she wanted to answer properly. Cord transferred the entire operational log, every sensor reading, every calculation, every calibration note from CASA's array, to the incoming command structure. The crew of the Unbroken Meridian said their goodbyes with the slightly awkward efficiency of people who were not naturally inclined to ceremony, but understood that certain moments warranted something. Riku gave back 17 credits he had apparently still owed, and which had somehow survived the past 4 days as a live debt. Osei shook hands with Threxvoth in the human way, which required a brief negotiation of applicable limbs, and which ended up being a handshake with one of the commander's functional secondary upper limbs, anatomically wrong, but expressively correct, which was the best outcome a cross-species handshake could hope for. Yara said goodbye to Threxvoth at the airlock. "Safe transit," he said. "Same to you. Get the rest of this place fixed." "We will." He was quiet for a moment. "The incident report. The one I submitted to Velhari Command." He paused in the way she had learned meant he was choosing words carefully. "I described your crew's actions in detail. The full detail." He paused again. "The report will be distributed widely through the Sovereignty's command structure." She looked at him. "Okay. It will change their understanding," he said. "Of what you are." "What do you think we are?" she asked. He considered this for a long time. She waited, because she had learned that his silences were worth waiting for. "You are," he said finally, "the species that comes." She thought about this. "Yeah," she said. "That's about right." She went back through the airlock. The seal closed behind her. Vasquez confirmed the docking clamps released clean. Cord plotted the return course. The Unbroken Meridian pulled away from the Vethra installation and oriented toward the survey route, toward the sample collection and the diplomatic mail drop and the long, quiet transit that was the ordinary shape of their days. In a mess, Riku was setting up the card game again. Osei was eating something from the fabricator that he had optimistically requested as beef stew, and which the fabricator had produced with its usual interpretive flair. Lena Vasquez was making a list of everything she needed to replace now that she had cannibalized 2 components from the secondary environmental system, and the list was both longer than she had initially estimated and shorter than it could have been. Yara came in and got rice from the fabricator. She sat at the head of the table. She picked up her fork. She did not start reading the repair manifest. Not yet. She sat for a moment in the ordinary hum of the ship. Cord's quiet processing, the air recyclers, the low vibration of the drive running at cruise, and she let it be what it was, the sound of a vessel carrying 11 people through deep space between one thing and whatever came next, which might be nothing for a long time, or might be the tone from the communications panel at some 314 that had not arrived yet. Both were fine. Both were the job. "Deal me in," she said to Riku. He dealt her in. She was a worse card player than she liked to admit, which she had always privately thought was a reasonable trade for the other things she was good at. She picked up her hand. She ate her rice. The Unbroken Meridian flew on into the dark. The dark, as it always did, waited. It was patient. It was large. It contained, somewhere in its enormous indifferent span, things that had not yet sent a signal, threats that had not yet announced themselves, 41 people, or 400 or 4,000, who were still fine right now, and might not be later. When the signal came, the crew of the Unbroken Meridian would hear it at whatever time the ship's clock showed, and whatever they were doing, eating, or arguing, or sleeping, or fixing something that did not need to be fixed yet, but would eventually. Someone would be hurt, and they would come. That was the sentence that ended with "so." The sentence that the Shreth had not understood, that the Velhari had learned, that 47 military academies would eventually teach as a warning to anyone operating in space where humans flew routes. Do not send a distress signal unless you mean it, because they will answer it, because they always answer it, because that is what they are.